I really want to thank all of you all for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend this really timely and fascinating discussion about the role of women in demining. As you might remember, yesterday was International Women's Day, and I want to start by recognizing the very important work that our speakers, Valeriia, is that pronounced correctly, and Cristy are doing every day in leading efforts to remove explosives that allow for safety in communities in Ukraine and in Sri Lanka. In their respective positions of leadership, Valeriia and Cristy show girls and women around the world what we are all capable of. Globally, demining organizations like the HALO Trust and like MAG are employing thousands upon thousands of women who bravely map explosives with GIS technology. They teach children how to stay safe from explosives, how to locate and carefully dig up landmines, how to support governments in managing their weapons stockpiles, how to manage enormous teams and conduct this dangerous and important work, and so much more. And I will point out that my own mother is a GIS expert, and so she is very engaged and involved in all of these kinds of technologies too. So gone are the days when women were unable to rise beyond being just simply administrative and in support positions in this particular area. And as the demining has become less and less male-dominated, it's encouraging to see the strides that are being made in employing a vastly higher number of women in this space. The success of these deminers and these global programs leaves a lasting impact and has the power to change mindsets. And the ways in which the inspiring demining work is conducted by people like Valeriia and Cristy lifts up women and everyone across their countries. And it's just one of the many reasons why I'm really proud to support this cause. And while I'll be co-leading a request with my colleague, Congressman Johnson, to support increasing funding for U.S. demining efforts. And with that, I'll turn it over to Laura from Representative Johnson's team for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Congressman. Everybody hear me? Yep, great. So thank you everybody for attending today's UXO Demining Caucus briefing. Unfortunately, Congressman Johnson is detained in an all-day markup, and he's disappointed, as am I, to miss this briefing, particularly as we have two presenters who have come such a long way to share their insights with us. So I apologize that he's not here, but I would like to read some brief remarks on his behalf. So, from Ukraine to Sri Lanka, from Angola to Cambodia, in celebration of International Women's Day, I'm pleased to see so many women taking on critical professional opportunities that transform communities, sometimes in areas where options for careers are limited. As we know, around the world, women face cultural obstacles to employment, but are also often relied upon to be the primary childcare provider, and they may not have the same access to educational and training opportunities as men. I'm pleased to see that organizations like HALO Trust and MAG provide robust training to their staff for both men and women. And HALO has started offering services such as childcare on some of their programs, which enables greater participation from mothers and those who might not have the same educational or other opportunities as their male counterparts. Ensuring that women are represented across demining is not just important for providing income and career development opportunities, but is essential in delivering the best possible demining efforts, drawing from a diverse and skilled workforce. And in some countries, this is the only culturally sensitive means to provide risk education to other women and to gather critical data on where women have seen evidence of landmines and other explosives. As Congressman Johnson has mentioned before, he had the opportunity in 2017 to visit one of HALO's demining sites in Sri Lanka. And he saw firsthand the painstaking work, some of which was being done by women, war widows from Sri Lanka's decades-long civil war. And that sparked his interest in demining issues and joining this caucus and ultimately being a co-chair. As Congresswoman Houlahan mentioned, Congressman Johnson and Congresswoman Houlahan will be co-leading an appropriations request to increase support for this work globally. And we hope that any of your bosses here will be able to join us. So thank you for the leadership and dedication of our speakers, Cristy and Valeriia. And we are looking forward to hearing more about your experiences, your work, and the status of demining efforts in Sri Lanka and Ukraine.
Lovely, thank you, Laura. And now I would like to introduce our very esteemed speakers. Valeriia Shumska is a program officer at the HALO Trust in Ukraine, where she leads all phases of program development, from planning and securing funding to coordinating teams and partners all across Ukraine, to gathering and reporting on key data about explosive contamination and other very important metrics. Valeriia comes from from Sloviansk in the Donetsk region of eastern Ukraine, and she joined Halo Ukraine in 2020 as an interpreter and was rapidly promoted to the position of monitoring and evaluation officer in 2022, where she is responsible for assessing the impact of Halo's landmine clearance operations in the aftermath of the Russian invasion. Thank you for being here, Valeriia. And next, I'd like to introduce Cristy McLennan. And Cristy is MAG's country director for Sri Lanka since January 2022. And prior to taking up that role, Cristy worked at MAG's head office since 2017 in the Government Relations Department. She is passionate about the scourge of landmines since she volunteered and later worked with the Canadian Red Cross and Mines Action Canada in the early 2000s to raise public awareness about this global issue. Before joining MAG, Cristy has also held senior humanitarian and emergency response roles with CARE International, Save the Children, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and in both head office and field office-based postings. And with that, a round of applause. We'd like to ask perhaps first Cristy to give some opening remarks on your work, and then Valeriia.
Thank you very much. I hope this is on. Wonderful. Thank you very much to the co-chairs and to all the members of this wonderful Congressional Caucus. So as Congresswoman Houlahan said, my name is Cristy. I'm the country director for MAG Sri Lanka. I've had the privilege to lead this program in Sri Lanka for a little over a year now, and I'm really excited to just give a brief overview of the activities that we do there. Weaving in some of the aspects around women in demining, which is the topic of our conversation today. And I think Sri Lanka is a great context to speak to on this issue. It does boast one of the highest numbers of women deminers in the world. And the other sort of positive aspect is that there is an end in sight to the mine clearance work that we're all doing in Sri Lanka. We're expected to finish by 2027. So it does beg the question, what are the positive impacts that demining has played in the lives of women coming from these conflict-affected areas within the country? And what are the opportunities that await them and all of our staff once the work of mine clearance is completed? So our main activity, of course, is humanitarian mine action in the country. We've been doing that for the last 21 years, actually, as has Halo. And we're working across most districts in the north and the east. And the size of our program has really varied over the years, but it has scaled up since about 2018, and we're approximately 1,000 staff now. So we run 50 mine action teams, 25 mechanical assets, 8 gender-balanced community liaison teams, and a number of other important positions, medics, drivers, training officers, etc. Not to mention a support structure that is required to run a program of this size. And this capacity is allowing us to release approximately 2.2 million square kilometers of land every year. And that land is returned back to the communities for productive use. As you can imagine, the land that MAG clears goes on to be used for all kinds of things: cultivation, agriculture, access to natural resources, and reconstruction and development, schools, hospitals, even a wind farm in the case of northern Sri Lanka. Actually, I was on a field visit late last year at one of the sites that WRA supported us to clear. And I met with a family whose land this belonged to. It was a family that was displaced during the conflict, like so many others, who returned to their home, and the immediate surroundings of their home was cleared. But the areas of land around where they live had not yet been cleared. And so MAG came in and cleared several acres of land, which allowed them to start growing papayas and chilies, which they sell on the local market. So it greatly enhanced their income, and it also provided more food security to the country, especially at a time now when that has become a real issue during this latest economic crisis. So it is really incredible to go out and see the tangible and manifold benefits that demining provides communities every single day. But the process of demining itself also generates stable, well-paid, and socially well-regarded jobs for people living in these post-conflict areas in Sri Lanka. and access to decent work in these areas can really be a game changer and transformative, especially for women. And this is especially where a lot of professional opportunities are quite scarce. And so we have seen a equal opportunity within the mine action sector that's really helped level a playing field for women from these communities. And there aren't all that many examples to point to other than that. So at the moment we have about 25% female staff, including 23% of our operational workforce are women. And this International Women's Day, we've actually highlighted some of our staff through social media, you might have seen. One woman in particular told us about the life that she lived prior to working with MAG. She was unfortunately a victim of domestic abuse. Her husband left her and her 3 children to fend for herself. She struggled to find any employment, not having any formal qualifications or education, and was in a very dark place. At one point actually homeless and living with her children on the street. She was out looking for work one day in the Valeriia area of northern Sri Lanka, and she heard another woman talking about her work with MAG, that she was a deminer. And they got to talking, and she heard that MAG was recruiting for new deminers, so she signed up, went through the interviews, passed the tests. It's quite a lengthy training process. And then she herself became a deminer and has worked for MAG for the last 6 years. She's now a deputy team leader, so she actually oversees her own team of 12 staff. She has a home, her kids are in school, she's supporting her mother. So this is one of many sort of great stories that we can speak to, and that I'm really happy that we can highlight on a day like yesterday, and hopefully more often as well. She says the work is hard, but she's proud to do it and to show that women can do what has typically been seen as a man's job. So the next main activity that we do is around what we call staff transition. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we have an end date to the work that we're doing in Sri Lanka, which is wonderful to talk about because there aren't all that many contexts that we can point to where we're so close to finishing the job. And we estimate that to be done by around 2027 if all goes well and we can continue to maintain our current capacity with all operators. But it does beg the question, what are the overall 3,000 demining staff in the country? That's with, from MAG, Halo, and some of the other operators that are working there. What are they going to go on to do? What will their opportunities be after this line of work has finished? And we know that not a lot of our staff had formal steady employment before getting into this line of work. As I mentioned before, the opportunities are not so forthcoming, and those who did work, they have found for women on average 3.5 times increase in their salaries since joining the demining sector. And for men, it's on average about 1.7 times increase from what they did in the past. And so this has spurred MAG to develop what we call a skills acquisition and post-demining livelihood strategy, which basically aims to take stock of the socioeconomic background of our staff, address what are the skill gaps that might be there, and how can we now already start to support and enhance filling those gaps so that people are prepared to go out and seek meaningful and well-paid jobs after this work is done. So we started to roll out these fundamental training opportunities already. It may feel a bit early, but we're looking at things like language training in English, Sinhala, and Tamil, financial literacy training to support, savings and budget management, things like agricultural orientation, because we know a lot of our staff are working in that area anyway. And all of that is meant to, enhance their skills for today, but also improve their chances of being able to successfully transition into other lines of work. And despite just starting this work last year, there have been several success stories already. We know of some women who've started raising chickens and selling the eggs as a secondary source of income after engaging in the financial literacy and agricultural training, for example. And the woman that I spoke about earlier who changed her life around after becoming a deminer has told us that she started taking the spoken Sinhala classes, and that has allowed her to speak with the Sri Lankan authorities, the Sri Lankan army, administrative staff, which has changed, boosted her own confidence and changed how she can communicate with others in the country. So it's expanded her perception of what is possible. The last activity that I just want to touch on very quickly, if I may, is that, again, with thanks to PMWRA, MAG is also working with the Sri Lankan Army and the Sri Lankan Police through constructing and rehabilitating armories, installing CCTV systems, and providing associate training to police officers, inspectors, and sergeants, ultimately to reduce the risk of arms being diverted into the wrong hands and reduce the risk of unplanned explosions. So we have a technical area of expertise that helps to promote a culture of small arms, light weapons, and ammunition security that is in line with international best practice. And this ultimately also contributes to safer communities and a reduction in armed violence. Women feature less in this area of our work than our mine action work, I have to say, but there are women police officers who have benefited from our training that we're providing, including one woman I met recently, Saduni, who joined the police force in 2009, and she's responsible for making sure that small arms within her department are safely stored and managed. She has her sights on becoming the first female Inspector General of the police in Sri Lanka. And I was really heartened that when I last met the current Inspector General of the police in Sri Lanka, he also outlined his vision for having more women police officers in the force, and that one day perhaps a woman would be at the helm of that job. He wants his force to be more responsive to community needs across the country, to be a trusted ally to civilians, and is looking at growing a community policing culture. So MAG is in discussions as to how we can support some of that to come to fruition. So I'll leave it there, and I hope I've managed to paint an overall picture of the work that's happening in Sri Lanka, and in particular shine a light on some of the great ways that women are contributing to demining, and vice versa, that the mine action sector is providing opportunities and confidence building to an increasing number of women, and this is really needed. So thank you once again to my co-chairs.
Thank you, Cristy. Really very helpful and insightful. And now for Valeriia, if you have some opening remarks, please.
First of all, thank you to Congresswoman Houlahan, Congressman Johnson, Kat and Laura, and UXO Demining Caucus for hosting this event. My name is Valeriia Shumska, and I'm the program officer at HALO Ukraine. For those who don't know, HALO Trust is one of the largest humanitarian mine clearance organization, and we work around 30 countries and territories in the world, removing landmines and other explosive items, including improvised explosive devices from land, and making it possible for people to get back to normal lives. We have a staff of more than 20,000 across the world, and 98% of them are locally employed and recruited. As a person who comes from the east of Ukraine, from a small but very beautiful town called Slovyansk, which is in Donetsk region, I personally saw the terrible impact of hostilities and fighting that took place in 2014 in my native region. Including the impact of landmine and other explosive items on people's life. And do you know how I found out about HALO? So I used to drive from my small village to town for doing some everyday stuff like helping my family with business or just simply visiting my grandmother. And one day, literally at the roadside, I noticed red signs that said danger mines. And close to the signs, I noticed the vehicles with HALO sign on them. So it turned out to be a minefield where HALO did demining. The minefield, which was literally like 5 minutes drive from my home, it was located in the tree line, which is quite common for Ukraine, the minefield in the tree line. The tree line that has been used by people for picking mushrooms or for collecting firewood or just for simply having rest and enjoying nature. But because of those 2 months of hostilities which took place back in 2014, it made it impossible for people to do the same simple things. And this was back in 2020 when I just a year after I graduated from the law university, and I understood that this is probably the area where I can contribute, and I decided to join the HALA Trust as an interpreter. Being an interpreter in HALA means that you don't do just some written translation. You need to go out in the fields, in the real minefields, wearing all protective equipment, including visors and protective vests, and being this key link between national staff who don't speak English and international staff, and ensuring that the message between them is well heard and transferred. So thanks to this experience, I had a huge exposure to the operations on the ground, and it made me understand that the work we do is really important, and I understood how difficult it is for people to, in terms of how physically demanding it is to spend the whole day staying on your knees and sweeping with the detector, searching for mines to remove them and make the land safe to use. Now I am a program officer at our new headquarters in Brovary, which is northeast from Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. New because last year, because of the war broke out, we had to evacuate our staff from the east of Ukraine, those who were ready to leave their homes because it was dangerous to stay there. And we evacuated from the east and were able to set up our presence in the north part of Ukraine as soon as the Russians withdrew from just the gates of the capital, from the northeast of Ukraine. As the world's largest landmine clearance organization, we are famous for our gender mainstreaming. And about 20% of Ukraine staff at HALA, they are women. In general, HALA employs nearly 3,000 women across the world, and we are aiming to achieve this gender parity across our programs. For example, in Angola, we've got 56% of female staff. And I'm happy to be a part of an organization that provides women with equal opportunities, job opportunities, and career opportunities as well. Given the war is still ongoing and lots of men, they are getting conscripted, HALA Trust in Ukraine is becoming more reliant on women. And that's why we are aiming to encourage more and more women to do this life-saving job. Ongoing hostilities have been causing huge damage in my country. And while we are all here discussing this important topic, the war is still ongoing. And just like today in the morning, I read on the news that yesterday there was a huge, massive missile attack across the country, and about more than 80 missiles launched across various cities in Ukraine, with deaths and casualties reported. Millions of people are displaced, some people are killed or injured, families are torn apart, and the same has happened to me. A week or so after the invasion, I had to leave my hometown, which is in the east of Ukraine, and start my life from scratch. My family also had to evacuate. We are separated. They are in the west part of the country, and I'm staying with HALA in Kiev. But I'd like to highlight the role of women at various levels in the country, because it doesn't matter if this is a woman who stays home in Bakhmut. Bakhmut is a city which is well known for harsh hostilities, and this is the city which is completely destroyed. And this woman, she stays home despite these threats, and she keeps baking bread for locals, baking bread for soldiers, and including like more high-level politicians who, because of men being unable to leave the country, they went abroad and they deliver the message of President Zelensky to encourage other countries to provide with military hardware and humanitarian assistance. Hela has been in Ukraine since 2016, and after briefly pausing the operations, we were able to continue our work in April 2022, as soon as Russians left suburbs of Kiev. And the scope of contamination is huge. Around 40% of Ukraine is contaminated with anti-personnel mines, anti-vehicle mines, and many other explosive ordnance. And 40% of Ukraine is approximately the same as the size of Florida state. So you can imagine the scale, and unfortunately it keeps growing. And I feel very proud to be here today and to share some other inspiring examples of how Halo women contribute to this life-saving work. There are lots of examples, and I would like to tell you about my colleague who joined Halo Trust together with me 3 years ago, and we both started out as interpreters. But 2 years later, she decided to change her career completely, and she joined Halo survey teams. Survey team means that the teams who are kind of like pioneers in mine action, because they visit the communities, they find the mines, they map them, and they submit this information where the minefield is. They submit this information to the clearance teams, demining teams, which will come and know exactly where the explosive hazards are and where they need to spend the whole day removing the landmines from the ground. I would now this person, she is supervising several survey teams, and she is in charge of the whole district. So she is progressing and doing her great job together with the other colleagues. I would also like to mention my another female colleague who joined Halo as a deminer, and she's from Bakhmut, again the city well known for the atrocious hostilities. And like every other Ukrainian, she had to leave her home last year and start her life in completely new area. When we were back in the East, when we had operations there, soon after she joined Halo Trust, she was suggested to take the paramedic training. Paramedic training means that the person can provide team members with first aid in case if any incident happens, and that means that that person was recognized as the one who is capable of doing that. Now this person, her name is Daria, and she is a deminer team leader, and she oversees the team of 8 other dedicated colleagues whose workspace is just simply farmland or tree line. One of the other important jobs Halo provides to people is educating people on explosive items which they may encounter in the communities. Because lots of people last year, they left their homes, they went abroad or to the other countries, and they don't know about the background of the region, which hostilities took place there. And our teams, they come to the communities, they spread the message about the explosive items, they tell people how they look like and how to behave in case if they find any of them in the backyard or in the tree line. And it's important because by just simply spreading the message, educating people and telling them where to report in case if you find the item, we already save lives. I would also like to mention that it's been more than a year since the war started, and Ukrainians, they somehow managed to adapt their lives to wartime. I don't want to use they get used to it, because the war is not something people should get used to. But like my 4-year-old nephew, he knows about missile attacks. He knows what they should do in case if air raid siren starts. And all kids from his kindergarten, they know about bomb shelter location. all this important work has been made possible with those people who are indifferent, particularly in large part from the US government. Our programs are managed by the State Department Office of Weapons Removal and Abatement, who have already allocated more than $90 million and for recent demining efforts. The most recent supplemental, Congressional supplemental also included up to $105 million for demining efforts in Ukraine. And this is the point where I want to express my huge thanks for you being supportive, and without your support, we wouldn't be able to save lots of lives.
Thank you. That both of your testimonies are overwhelming, and we're really grateful for the work that you all are doing. We're going to be moving over to some questions that we will be sharing, but I'm going to turn the mic over to Kat because I'm heading to one of my, I say this is my Hermione necklace. It's the thing I spin around so I can be in 3 places at one time. I'm going to be heading to another location, but it's a pleasure to be with you guys, and I'm going to hand it over to Kat.
So we will kick it off with some questions. So I think to start for both of you, what are some of the challenges that your organizations face in recruiting and, equally importantly, retaining women working on your programs? And what are you doing to overcome those challenges? So if anyone wants to go first. Chrissy?
Sure. Thank you.
Hello.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I think, well, a couple of examples I can think of in the Sri Lankan context. We have seen, as I said, I think before, we're sitting at about 25% of our overall workforce as being women, and that has increased steadily over the years. We saw quite a change more recently, just since COVID, when we changed our methodology. So prior to COVID, we had a system whereby all of our demining teams were going out for an operational cycle of about 20 days, and they were camping in the areas where they were to obviously have closer access to the minefields, some of which are very far away from towns and villages and far from each other. And with COVID, we didn't do that anymore. We actually changed the way of working, where we looked at where people were from and offered them more sort of stable positions in certain areas that allowed them to just go out to the minefield, complete their work for the day, and then return home. And when we made that switch, we saw a lot of women join us and come back to working for MAG if they had left before, maybe if they've gone to have children, or, they were more reticent to be away from the household. So that was a major change that saw our numbers grow. And I think for retention, we're quite careful to just, to make sure that it's a safe and comfortable environment for women to work in. I know that our women in Sri Lanka specifically have faced challenges, signing up to do this kind of work. It has been seen as unusual and, perhaps challenging, the status quo. But over time, and it's not just MAG, but the other operators who are there who also employ high levels of women in their staff, it has normalized. And people see that, they have the ability to do the work. They come home and, the income that they're earning is going to, improve their families' lives, paying for school fees and healthcare. And so people are realizing that, well, actually, there's nothing wrong with this, and it's actually shows that women can do these types of roles that have often been seen as quite male dominated. So I think MAG is seeing that in other contexts as well. So we'll continue to try to boost that number a little bit higher as well.
Thank you for the question, for the answer. Speaking about challenges, I would probably say firstly about HALO globally. There are lots of countries where, because of cultural stereotypes, people think that women, they just simply cannot do this work, and there are some cultural barriers which don't allow women to work in a mixed team with like the other men they don't know. Like in places like Afghanistan or in Syria, we have this perception that women, they cannot do this like physically difficult job. So that it's up to Houlahan to educate people and to reach the point where it becomes possible. Like for Afghanistan context, we have women in one team with their brothers or husbands so that they are in friendly environment and we can make sure that there are no threats to women. Speaking about Ukraine, as far as I remember, up until 2017, it wasn't possible for women to be a deminer at the legislative level. And since then, that has changed. So we are working on this. We are encouraging people to join. Sometimes it's more about women being ready to do this job, but lots of women, they are so inspired and they are so dedicated. So I'm speaking about Ukraine now. About the ways how we can provide retention, we ensure that. As Cristy mentioned, we ensure that people are in friendly environment, first of all, and we also support them with some childcare allowance or with some access to health specialists so that women can work and can make sure that they won't have any issues.
Okay, our next question is for Cristy. And I understand that Sri Lanka is one of the countries nearing completion of demining operations, which is so wonderful to hear. How long do you see the U.S. maintaining demining assistance there?
Thank you, Laura. I hope that this new strategy that I mentioned, which is with the cabinet and the government of Sri Lanka at the moment for sign off, we all hope that it passes and that we can maintain this completion timeline up to 2027. And that does, include a number of assumptions. For example, the levels of funding that we're receiving now from our great supporters, including the US, to see us through to the end. And we would hope that all of our donors kind of see us through to that. I mean, what is great is that the US, among others, are already supporting some of the livelihood transition work, in addition to the important clearance and operations. So we do see, a role for that to continue. But also the work that we're doing on weapons and ammunition management, which is also generously supported by WRA. That is something that we started more recently in the country, just in 2019, and has been quite successful so far. And we do expect that to continue to scale up year on year. So we see ourselves carrying on with that work well beyond the completion deadline of the mine action activities.
For Valeriia, to help us really understand what it's like on the program, can you describe what a typical day looks like for you with Houlahan Ukraine? Is there a typical day?
I think you can. Yeah, sometimes it's difficult to say about planning within this unsettling environment, but I can easily describe my day. As a program officer, this role entails more working with the donors, with the reports. So I usually spend my day in the office communicating to teams on the ground, just to figure out the context and to make sure that I keep up with the pace of what's going on in the fields. But what I like the most about my job, that sometimes this is probably what I miss about being an interpreter, because when I was an interpreter, I spent like lots of time visiting minefields and being out. But sometimes even if as a program officer, I need to go to, I join the teams and I visit both minefields or survey teams, and I speak to people who have been somehow affected by war, and I speak to people. I see the operations on the ground. I see how demining look like, and I collect some information for, let's say, impact stories. So this is mostly the office-based work, but I do like that sometimes I have chances to go and see people outside.
Back to Cristy. Is there any distinction in your efforts to empower women as you compare demining work to the weapons security work?
Yeah, I think there's, we're more in control of the mine action work, given that we, recruit and train all of our staff in the demining sector. And, several of those, as I mentioned in my remarks, have gone on to stay working with MAG for quite some time. In fact, we do have one female field operation manager, of which there are only 3 in that role. It's sort of the second to the most senior of the operational roles in our chain of command. And so she's overlooking an entire district of where we work. And so that's really exciting, and it's something that we are careful to try to nurture as much as possible for that retention and career growth. On the weapons and ammunition management side, it's a little different because we're not working with our own staff. We're supporting, state security actors, and, have to kind of work within what that makeup, looks like. But as I did mention there, it sounds like, the partners that we're working with have a lot of great ideas for seeing, more women take up certain roles. And we can bring that expertise that we have both from the mine action sector, but also from weapons and ammunition work that we've done in other contexts, to support like gender assessments and sort of build an understanding of that diversity strengthens programming. And so we have a lot of examples we can draw on that we'd like to bring to the Sri Lankan context as well.
And another question for Valeriia. You mentioned, of course, that, Ukraine is 40% mined, I think you said, and this is prior to the invasion last year. This is not a new issue. While the situation is ongoing, can you tell us more about the future of demining in Ukraine? What that looks like, what you're envisioning?
Thank you. Okay, great question. It goes without saying that Halo Trust, MAG, and other mine action operators, they will need to stay in Ukraine for decades, because as the war is still ongoing, this mine contamination issue keeps growing. And this is how we try to, we estimate that we'll be in Ukraine for quite a while, and we plan to expand our staff in the near future. As I said, we plan to have 1,200 staff by the end of this year, so that we will be able to cover the whole areas which are required our presence there. And that is happening thanks to support of the U.S. Department of PMWRA, and this is the way how we, how even staying like far away from Ukraine, you can make difference.
And this next one is for both of you. What can Congress be doing to help support women in demining and demining more broadly?
My answer would be simple and probably short. Just keep supporting, both financially and being vocal about this issue.
Not much to add other than to continue having events like this, which is really great opportunity. And anytime there's an opportunity to visit and see the work on the ground where the environment lends itself, it really kind of brings the issue to light, and people get to really understand the challenging work, but also the rewards that come with it.
So take it back to your bosses. Funding. We'll go about it. And this is our last question for the panel, then we'll open it up to the audience for anyone who might have questions. Working around explosives, I think, Valeriia, you mentioned this, that in Ukraine, women couldn't even work on demining until 2017. Work around explosives probably manifests somewhat of a bravado or macho culture. How do you address that? And have you seen changes in that perspective over time as more women get involved in this work?
Yeah, it's definitely been a male-dominated sector. I think it's fair to say it still is, but with my time having joined MAG in 2017 until now, I have seen a sea change actually in the organization, and I think in the broader sector, although I can't say for sure, but I guess part of it is unfortunately the work that we do has scaled up over time. I mean, just hearing Valeriia, talk about Ukraine over the last couple of years and several other contexts in Syria and Iraq, Afghanistan, where the trend is not going in the right direction. So there's sadly more work to do, and there are more people working in the sector. But I think organizations have made a concerted effort to make sure that those are more diverse and inclusive as we've gone on. I mean, MAG now has a global head of safeguarding, a global gender advisor, a gender equity and diversity team, and these are things that they didn't have 10 years ago. So I think that change does come from the top, and it's incorporated into our strategy, and that increasing diversity also changes the dynamic. And we have, as you pointed out, we do have more women joining roles. It's become more normalized to see women working with metal detectors and putting on PPE, or even in some cases operating the heavy machinery, becoming medics. So I think that bravado type atmosphere is waning, but I think there's still more that we can do, and more work to do there.
I wouldn't say that for Ukraine specifically, it's that much of an issue. There is still this biased, maybe a little bit biased perception that women, they are not able to do this type of work. But in general, by educating people, by encouraging, by having safeguarding procedures in place, we see the results, and we see that the situation has been changing. Our percentage of female employees is growing, so this is probably tells us that we are doing the right thing.
For sure. Thank you both. Anyone out there have any questions for our panelists? Their work in demining, or country specifically?
What is the typical age range for women in this field, or where you both work, for the deminers?
I don't know off the top of my head. I know that our demining workforce range, anywhere from 20 up until about 55 or so. So it's quite diverse. We have done, these staff surveys to really identify different age groups, different vulnerabilities, levels of education, etc., so that we can kind of pinpoint and make this training program that we've started quite bespoke. But I unfortunately can't tell you any more than that at this stage. But it does range from young to older.
It's probably also the case in Ukraine. Legal employment age is 18 years old, and we've got some employees for that age. However, in average, I would say that around 30s, these are women who usually are deminers or other members of staff.
I know you spoke a little bit, both of you spoke a little bit about the benefits in a way that you give the women who are in demining, such as, healthcare benefits and money towards childcare. Could you talk a little bit more about some of those benefits or other benefits that you provide to women in these spaces to make sure that they're able to go to work without the added stress of their outside of work activities?
From Houlahan's side, child care allowance, this is financial support for women. And we provide all women who are eligible to this support with this assistance, so that they can use those money for hiring people who can look after their kids, because sometimes the minefields, they can be located not within the district where they live, so they need to go on the business trip for 10 days working cycle, and this is an instance where that support would be handy.
As I mentioned before, we try to, match people's home areas to their work areas so that to minimize the time and travel that they're spending away from home. Another thing that we've been doing in Sri Lanka recently, and this is not just for the women but for all staff, is providing mental health awareness training. And that's, just recognizing the context that we're working in. It's a fresh post-conflict situation where there is a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder, and people generally haven't had much of an opportunity to really explore what that means, or how it comes out in sort of day-to-day life. And the anecdotes we've heard back, and particularly from women staff, is that even just having that awareness has helped them kind of label some of the challenges that they're going through. And part of that training is also to provide people who need it and who request it with free access to counseling for more support. So a lot of women have taken that opportunity. We also provide gender sensitivity training to our staff, both men and women, to, as you say there, make sure people understand what, not just that, women should be comfortable in the workplace, but, understanding that they do often have a double burden. They're still the ones that are, looking after the children, making sure everything's fine at home, getting up very early in many cases to sort of manage all of that, and then go and have, a full day at work. So we're trying to provide some training around, those issues and just help build the awareness. And, hopefully that contributes to leveling more of the playing field as time goes on.
Anyone else? All right. Well, with that, I guess we will wrap things up unless our panelists would like to offer any closing remarks, anything you didn't get to say.
I would like to thank you once again, and thank you for all your work you do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us here today, and I hope we can meet again.
Absolutely. On behalf of our bosses, thank you so much for being here. And let's give them a round. If any of you have questions about the UXO caucus, please reach out to Laura or myself. Happy to get you that information, and that appropriations sign-on letter will be circulating shortly. So please keep an eye out for it. And thank you all so much for coming.